Yeah.
Okay, we are live.
All right, well, I drew the short straw apparently. So welcome. I guess we're calling to order the meeting, March 13th meeting of the Affordable Housing and Production Task Force. I hope, Caitlin, that you call the roll.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Okay, so Director Heckles,
Oh,
Senator Huxtable, Representative Johnson. Senator Hawker has a proxy, Amy Willie.
Here.
Present, okay. Rep. Polowski let us know that he was going to be absent. David Edgel,
here.
Kimberly Cole,
Here.
Pam Scott. Absent, Sarah Kiefer. Preston Shell,
Here.
Kevin Spence. I think is absent. Wes Stefanik,
Here.
Deborah Burgos. Is absent. Mike Ryman,
Here.
Amy Walls,
Here.
Sherry Heisler is absent. Kevin Smith,
Here.
Karen Speakman,
Here.
and Rachel Stucker. Here. Here, okay, so we have 5 absent and 14 present. We do have a quorum. And real quick, is there a way to make them louder for us? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we do have a quorum.
Okay, distributed here in paper and was it available online, the minutes?
They were emailed to everybody yesterday. Apologies for the very short review time.
Well, I assume everyone has had the chance to review them. Does anyone have any concerns or edits or comments to the minutes from the February 20th meeting?
Only comment I have is just my name spelled wrong under the presentation section. It's a typo.
We did that on purpose.
That's okay. Everybody does it.
Okay.
We were wondering if you were gonna see
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I want to make sure I read the minutes.
Exactly.
I used to,
Accept your test.
every now and then to see if people were reading my weekly reports, I would put first person to read this gets a cup of coffee. Deep into some policy argument. Yeah, and only had a couple phone calls. All right, any other comments or misspellings? None, all in favor of adopting the minutes from the February 20th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item is, I think, mine. So I'm gonna switch my screen share real quick to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, then while you're doing that, why don't I just sort of say, the co-chairs and some DSHA staff got together over the, since the last meeting to talk through some of these recommendations and an overall sort of path forward. So hopefully it's helpful to our process. But there are certainly a lot of recommendations, and we want to make sure that we are focused now, I think, on the ultimate outcome of all of the tremendous work that's been put into this task force through the subcommittees and all of the recommendations and the conversations and research that went into all of that is greatly appreciated. But we want to make sure that we leave the work of the task force by giving some pretty clear and actionable recommendations moving forward for the state, whether they be implemented through budgetary processes or legislative or administrative. Different recommendations touch on each of those sort of ways of implementing the recommendation. But I think it's our understanding that this task force's work will come to an end And I think we're really just want to take a moment and sort of say that we're motivated to have some things that we can take and move forward from there. In different paths forward. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, I guess it's to me now. Thank you, Director. Real quick, Deborah, I've been trying to promote you to panelist. Not sure if that's working, so I'm just gonna click allow to talk so you can chime in. All right, so as Director Heckles was alluding to, me and a couple of my colleagues tried to take all 71 recommendations and figure out collectively, what are all these things telling us? What is the big picture? What is the sort of 30,000-foot view? And so these slides are my attempt to synthesize and summarize. Not every one of the 71 recommendations are called out individually in this presentation, and not all of them are neatly summarized or in a bucket. That's just because some of them were, a little bit different than some of the other recommendations and didn't have a neat little home. But I say that just to say that, I imagine this discussion today, we can talk about all of the individual subcommittee level recommendations. All right, can I get the slides to work? Okay, so this is the overview. So again, collectively, the 5 subcommittees came up with 71 recommendations. There were 18 from Finance and Development, 8 from Regulatory and Permitting, 12 from Construction, 27 from Manufactured Housing, and 6 from Community Focus Groups. So what I did is I printed out all 5 subcommittees sets of recommendations. I got highlighters out. I was trying to color code. And after I went through that exercise, certain things rose to the top for me personally. So my major takeaways when I look at this body of work is there are specific types of residential development, like actual housing types that we're saying we want to encourage. There are specific populations for whom we want to target this residential development. There are specific places where we want this development to occur. And there are specific tools that we want to use to get this new development. And then there are also specific supports that are needed to address affordability in the short term, like as we're working on the supply problem. And there's also a need for preservation of existing affordable housing stock. Those were the big main themes that I took away from the 71 recommendations. So I'm just going to go through, these different high-level takeaways. Okay, so the types of development that were called out in some way, shape, or form by the various subcommittees include diverse housing types. So specifically, our community focus groups subcommittee had recommendations that highlighted the need for accessory dwelling units, micro units, single room occupancies, and group homes. Of course, our manufactured housing subcommittee is interested in seeing more manufactured housing being built. Community focus groups also highlighted the need for accessible units and accessible to persons with a range of different disabilities. The need for higher story buildings that came up within the construction subcommittee, higher density projects in general. I think that was a theme in at least a couple of the different subcommittees. And then also master plans were mentioned within one of the regulatory and permitting subcommittee recommendations. But those are the types that I was able to pick out from the collective 71 recommendations.
Can I ask a question, please? As a non-planner, can you briefly explain the difference between a master plan, and a comprehensive plan?
I
Just briefly?
can briefly do that. Comprehensive plans are sort of general overview of the future land uses in terms of future land uses in a particular jurisdiction. And they have general land use categories: commercial, mixed use, residential, industrial, so on and so forth. And, that's kind of done, for all the lands in the community, but it doesn't go they don't always go in detail. So if you have residentially zoned land in that community, like residentially zoned future land use, the law says that local government has to zone that appropriately for residential use, so that happens. It doesn't always go into detail of, do those areas have access for sewer, water, roads, other infrastructure necessary so that it could be a shovel-ready development. So people in Mike's business and Preston's business, when they go in to look at that land, they may have to do studies and engineering and, pay for, TISs and road improvements and sewer extensions and things of that nature. So what a master plan does is looks at not only the future land use and the zoning, but also is that land available to be developed, and is it shovel ready for development, and are there the utilities and other supports needed to make that a possible thing to happen in the near or short term? And that's the difference. It's like a more detailed level of planning.
Okay.
So it's, kind of a lot of the recommendations that, the permit streamlining recommendations that we had in our subcommittee for regulatory and permitting, reflects the frustration and the length of the process that the development community has to go through, where the master planning is not done, and where we can deliver, hopefully, that shorter process would be in a local jurisdiction that has gone sort of that extra level and answered some of those questions. If not made the investments, it's very unlikely a local government's gonna, make a lot of investments on spec, if you will, on the sewer and water and things, but at least that information would be, planned in advance, made available, and hopefully, streamlined in terms of the approval process, so that's the way we would make that distinction. That's kind of what I think we meant.
I just had a kind of a process question. So as we're going through
Thank you.
this, are you looking for specific feedback on each of these as we go through them, or?
I think when we get to back up a slide, to the. Yes, you can give feedback as we go along. I think is the short answer.
Yeah, that's fine. So we go to the slide that you were on, just one thing that and maybe this is captured under higher density projects, but we did talk a lot about smaller lot, single family, townhomes, duplexes, those kinds of things. So in terms of the diversity of housing types, you can argue higher density projects maybe captures that, but I want to make sure that's not lost.
Sure, yeah. That's a great point.
And I would add to, just on the finance development side, one of the things that we talked about specifically, which might also fall into the multifamily, is trying to take advantage of existing multifamily sites with land that might still be available for redevelopment. Basically, filling in some space at existing sites.
Okay, I think we do.
Yeah, that might be under where to encourage development.
Yes. Yep. Which is 2 slides from this one. Okay. But yes, please give, commentary as we go along. Because I want this to, be reflective and accurate of what everybody, has been talking about these past 6-9 million years. Okay. Target populations. There were a lot of conversations in multiple subcommittees about, when affordable housing for who, right? We know that affordability is a function of income. We know that the broader task force charge is to make recommendations to increase supply all across that income spectrum. But what I am understanding from the subcommittees is that if we're talking about expediting or incentivizing specifically affordable projects, what we want that to mean is projects where the units are affordable to renter households making up to 80% AMI, or the units are affordable for owner households making up to 120% AMI. Specifically, those are the sort of thresholds that came up in one of the construction subcommittee recommendations, as well as one of the finance and development subcommittee recommendations. So that's why that's there. Additionally, our community focus groups has called out the need for housing that meets the needs, again, of people with a range of disabilities and people who need supportive housing. So not just the unit, but the, close by services to help them in other areas of their life. Any discussion on this slide? Okay. Okay, so where we want to encourage development, there was a lot of talk about putting more development in investment levels 1 and 2, which is where, you know, the state is front loading its infrastructure dollars. There was also mention specifically of infill parcels, vacant or abandoned parcels. Being able to do like mixed use conversions of commercial and retail space, locating near transit. And then also looking at state-owned properties to see if any of them would be suitable for affordable development. Any commentary on this slide?
My only comment is that when you look at, if you actually look at a jurisdiction, a county or a town, and then look at individually, what's every undeveloped level 1 and level 2 property? I can usually come up with a story of shall never sell, that's in preservation, that doesn't have sewer and can't have sewer, this actually is mostly wetlands. And you can go through and realize that that entire jurisdiction in their level 1 and level 2 have 27 acres of developable land left. So my advice would be either take a hard look at the state planning office in the future at exactly how much land in level 1 and 2 is developable, and if there's not enough, increase the size of level 2 or increase the size of level 1, or change that to say investments level 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that and say that I would just add the blank statement municipalities, right? Meaning if you're in a municipality, we should be developing in a municipality. And I would add to that county growth areas. A good example is Kent County's growth zone has level 3 and 4 inside the growth zone. So I would be nervous about limiting to levels 1 and 2 and ignoring, you know, the county's growth zones that are in place.
And I would just, you know, we've got some gross numbers about how much land is left in each of these levels, and we are currently updating the state strategies. So, you know, that could certainly change in 2025, but I definitely think it would be helpful, and maybe it's, you know, not something we can do between now and next week, but it would be helpful to do some case studies of what you were saying, Preston, you know, okay, in the given town or a portion of the county, how much land is there available? You know, where are the parcels? You know, so definitely think it's worth looking into that. I think you'll find more, you know, with our gross numbers, we have more than enough to meet our housing demand through 2040, statewide in levels 1, 2, and 3. You know, in level 1 and 2, are there enough? And what we don't show in this gross level analysis is what size are the parcels and what, you know, what's the configuration of those parcels. So I think it'd be really helpful to look at a town or a county growth area or something and do that. So that's something that we can work with you to do.
Anything else before I move to the next slide?
Well, yeah, so I'm not sure how we've resolved that, though. I mean, so is because this could be read as the task force is recommending that investment be restricted to levels 1 and 2.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that's what the task force just said. So is there a way for us to sort of context that?
Can we say and level 3 when adequate infrastructure is present or something like that?
That is a good way to put it, because that's, you know,
I know it's like a
oftentimes we,
generic term, but the way I interpret that is, do you have sewer, do you have water, do you have adequate road infrastructure?
and there are some areas in level 3 that have some of those things, and there's areas that are level 3 because they don't have those things right now, but it's planned in the, you know, in the future. So a caveat like that would certainly, yeah, to me, it would work. I also want to point out this infill parcels issue in terms of capacity. We've done some other research and modeling, and, you know, in Kent and Sussex, about 30% of the development we've seen over the past 10 years or so has been infill development, in terms of not a greenfield that's of any size, but in a town, or on a property that's currently, you know, one thing and it's turned into housing. And in Newcastle County, because of the county is pretty much north of the canal, mostly developed, it's 60%. So, you know, the question of, you know, level 1 and 2 and say Newcastle County is probably where we're going to see the most activity. And in Kent and Sussex, you know, we'll see some activity in levels 1, 2, and maybe 3, but, you know, a significant amount will also happen in the towns in what we would categorize as infill. which with the mapping we do, really just means it's in a town that we're not showing a big farm field or something there, but it's still developable and kind of gets to your point about.
But again, so so should we not say levels 1 and 2 at all and make a more broad statement about infrastructure or things?
Let's like to at least tie it to the county, or the county and local government comprehensive plans and their growth areas. The investment levels work closely with those. They're highly correlated. I think I'd like to tie it to the state strategies in some ways, because that's the way we, internally in the state prioritize our resources. But I think some, levels 1 and 2 and 3 where adequate infrastructure exists in concert with the county or local
I
comprehensive
would put a
plan.
comma though after 1 and 2, so they don't think that the adequate infrastructure pertains to level 1 and 2 also.
Yeah.
So it's levels 1 and 2, period, end of story.
I think,
And level 3.
yeah, and I think 1 and 2 are ones we're most likely to have the infrastructure that's
Right.
necessary. Comma 3 and levels 3 where sufficient infrastructure exists.
And to address your
Yeah,
comment
Can we
too,
make some live edits here, everyone?
as a developer, we want as much specificity as possible. So we want something we can hang our hat on in an ordinance that says we can do this. It doesn't say we can do this if that and the other thing, so the public can come in and argue if that and the other thing is all present, to which they will.
Yeah, sufficient infrastructure isn't giving you a whole lot of
Yeah.
specificity.
So like, it's funny, he mentions infill development as what we want to encourage, but from a developer standpoint, the toughest to get approved is often infill.
Yeah.
Because by definition, you have neighbors.
and the toughest.
And the
to do.
neighbors will show up and say, my realtor told me I could always walk my dog back there and no one would ever do anything. But when we go in the middle of a farm field where no one's around, it's crickets at our hearings. And so like, whatever we do, we have to make it so I can walk in. And if I'm in level 1 and I'm in infill and the infrastructure is there, it doesn't matter how many people show up and tell me I'm a horrible person. I'm relying on the ordinance and I can do it.
That gets to the whole buy rate and
Right.
that whole, as a
Right.
recommendation somewhere down here.
So I would.
Karen's hand is raised. Sorry, I just want to recognize her. Karen?
I think we're getting into the minutia. I mean, won't that be later in some of the recommendations? That's where we'll clarify that kind of wording. This is an overall, I think what you've added is fine. I think when it deals with, the whole process of approvals, then we can specify what we want in that wording. That makes sense.
I like the addition. I think it's fine. I would add to this though, at the end, local and county growth areas. Because I know there is level, at the very end, I would add a separate bullet that respects the local and county growth zones. There is level 4 in Kent County's growth zone. It shouldn't be level 4. It just shouldn't be.
I feel like you guys just need to be on the same page with, because I don't see that often in Sussex County. So you just need to be on the same page with those local jurisdictions and make sure your levels conform with their.
They're not exact, but they're awfully closely related to the county and the local government. The municipal annexation areas are pretty much all in level 2 and 3. There are some, again, in Sarah's, Kent County's growth zone, there are some in southern parts where the sewer, is not there yet.
Sewer's not there.
That's just reality that we, the way we do this, but I think this language, I have no objection to the language. I have no objection to Mike, what you're saying. If it's in a county growth area, it's certainly something that we can and should work with, and we absolutely do respect the local government's comprehensive plans. But again, and perhaps this is something that Josh is over there taking notes. This is something that we can address as we update the state strategies this year and make a concerted effort. to look at
That
closely.
feels to me like it's an extension of the first bullet though, and I don't. Karen, I agree with you. However, I think that this might be the one area in this, in all of these recommendations where, that's kind of the touchiest, where we want to make sure we're pretty clear. It sounds like what we're saying is investment in levels 1, 2, parts of 3 where infrastructure exists, and or local and county growth area zones. And I feel like they're all related because they are sort of the geography of, everything else here is infill, vacant, it's more, the character of, as opposed to the zones and.
I think in reality, if there were an area in a county growth zone where sewer was not available yet, that is not where a development is gonna go in the short term, but it may be somewhere that it goes in 2, 3 years, 5 years when that
Yeah.
infrastructure is there. So I mean, I don't think there's a lot of risk in.
Does that work?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Does that work for you, Dave? How it's written there?
That works.
Real quick, since we're making live edits, I do just want to jump back to this one and to Mike's earlier point, add in. I think we were talking about like smaller, single family detached.
Small lot,
Townhome.
single family, townhomes and duplexes.
Small, single family, townhomes, duplex. All right, anything else to add on that?
Well, it was small lot, was the.
Small lot.
It's like the jurisdictions often have a minimum lot size, and that's a hidden anti-affordability clause.
Yeah.
And we do, so future slides do get at that, that stuff. Okay, all right.
With all of with the needs assessed, it's strange to me that anything single family would be encouraged. Given the housing needs assessment, given what we know about affordability, given what we know about wanting to not encourage sprawl and create higher density. It's strange to me that anything single family would end up in our recommendations. We know we have a lot of single family. We know that our jurisdictions allow a lot of single family. I don't think we need to encourage more of it. That's my feedback on that one.
The only argument, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Deborah.
The only argument I would make to that is having small lot, single family that's more affordable allows that ladder effect. So right now, there are probably people in affordable houses that aren't able to make a slight move up because there's nothing in between that townhouse in the city and something affordable. You almost have to go to something larger on a large lot. So while it may not be a priority, it certainly helps the situation by having those small lot, single family homes available, particularly if they're new construction.
So the distinction here is that there's smaller lot sizes.
Yeah, so you can get more per acre, higher density.
Which
I was
means
gonna bring up
cheaper
things
building.
like Tiny homes, cottages, things of that nature, would be technically single family.
Pocket neighborhood, yeah, yeah.
I think.
Pocket
Pocket neighborhood
neighborhoods,
houses are
Pocket
like.
neighborhoods
not
and.
very small. Right, just not very actually small.
Well, for the
But the
market,
highest-
for the
they could
market.
be, they could be.
They could be.
I guess they could be. I would just like to encourage this group to be thinking more about what we don't have. And so if what I'm hearing, so can someone just define to me what small lot, single family, how small is the lot?
5,000 square feet.
Which is basically just going back to where they were 75 years ago.
Yeah.
Like when you drive through downtown Lewis or any of our old towns, everybody's like, oh, it's adorable. Why don't you developers do stuff like this? It's because we can't anymore. But with these.
Is that
changes,
less than
good.
a quarter acre? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Minimum lot size in
Yeah.
Newcastle
Half an
County
acre,
is 6,500
about an eighth
square
of an
feet.
acre.
About an eighth of an acre, okay.
So the other way to look at the red with the small lot is the term missing middle housing is another term that kind of
Okay,
captures that.
Do we can we put in parentheses missing middle?
There's a lot about that in the literature, and I think
That's helpful.
that's a good term
you.
that kind of directs me. It's not, we're not just doing single family homes, we're doing what's missing in that middle range.
I think Deborah hit the nail on the head with her comment though about the mobility issue. It's all interconnected, the entire market.
There's a lot of studies on that. Like, we get in the weeds if we talked about it, but there's a lot of crowding out. If you don't provide that gap housing, you crowd down or crowd up. And so even though it's not specifically what we're looking for, we will make somebody who has lower income not be able to live where they live. Because the person we didn't provide the housing from here jumped down to that level.
No, clarifying for me what small lot meant was very helpful, thank you.
Okay.
I don't know if this is accurate data, but I thought I read the other day that the average home size in Delaware is like 2,500 square feet. Does that, did I get that right somewhere? Or-
Not sure.
I don't remember what I was reading, but it was, I don't know if that was new homes or average.
That's
for the
probably
city.
new homes.
Maybe the new homes, but when you talk about affordability, you guys can't price 2,500 square feet.
Are a lot of the single families you build on small lots,
Well,
or you'd like them to be?
The ranch houses we built are on the smallest lots that the county allows, 6,500 square feet.
Okay.
Um. We didn't have anything we wanted to edit on this slide, correct?
Great.
Cool. All right, and we've done this slide. Can we move on to the next one?
I'm so sorry. I have a comment on this.
Oh,
I know you're
okay.
running out. I just wanted to, and I don't know that I'm saying anything should change on the slide. I just get nervous particularly from a NIMBY perspective. We want to encourage development near transit, yes. But oftentimes the lack of transit is used as a reason why an affordable housing development shouldn't be built in a place where it can clearly be successful and should be built. So I agree that we should encourage development near transit. I'm nervous that could be construed and used wrongly, and so I don't know if I want to edit some language around it. The chicken egg problem with transit and affordable housing, it makes me nervous to have that sit there the way it's currently
You just
written.
add when possible at the end of that,
Or near
or
infrastructure.
something,
Keep it broad.
add a caveat.
I feel
Well, it is, I agree with you, Rachel, it's pigeonholing people's understanding of who
Right,
needs affordable
Right.
housing.
right. A lot of
My-
people.
my-
that have-
My clients all have cars.
Yeah.
And they're willing to commute. They don't take the bus. But. it's
It'd be great if there
affordable
was a
housing.
bus, but there isn't, and I don't think that should stop us from housing people.
Right.
And that just makes me nervous.
So
So,
you cut out the entire southern half of Sussex County, didn't you, with that? We don't even have buses in this.
So I mean, it's,
all right,
I do want to, another comment though, the near transit is more of a quick fix. I think creating more public transportation so that more areas are accessible, because those in that 80% AMI range, cars are currently expensive and they're getting more expensive, as is insurance. So if you build something right now near transit, you are opening it up to much more people, but we do need to invest in more public transportation in Delaware so that we can grow that affordable housing market to other areas, if that makes sense, in my opinion.
I think it makes perfectly good sense, because as I'm sitting here and I'm listening, I'm like, yeah, near transit. But what we also need to attach to that is the infrastructure and the desire to continue to grow. We know you already said it, like, you're not going to catch a bus, all the way downstate. And so having some language that conveys the expectation is growth as it relates to public transportation. We already have a problem, and we also know that all of these things are connected. So what does that language, I said a lot, but I didn't tell you exactly what.
I know, and I feel bad bringing that up and not having a clear
I
recommendation.
feel with that little asterisk.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't preclude the housing from
Right.
being built, but it's desirable if you can accomplish
Yes.
the transit connectivity. And for those of, just so everybody's aware, that the Delaware Transit Corporation's new plan, Start Reimagined, expands the use of micro transit areas, which are in place in Newark and Georgetown now, but basically it's like an Uber type service that will deviate from, doesn't have a route. It will take you to the nearest bus stop or to your destination on demand. And the idea there is to expand that transit accessibility to a larger area, not just a transit line with bus stops. And that is probably a many-year implementation. But I think that in the future, there will be a lot more areas with that access to transit and basically relatively low. These are all areas that are lower density than fixed route service would be able to serve, but it adds that transit accessibility to a whole lot more population in Delaware. So, think about the cul-de-sac that's, a mile from the nearest bus stop, all of a sudden has the opportunity for somebody to call that service. So
What if we also added, in addition, I like the asterisks too, but what if we also added near transit or where transit is planned? Understanding that the development process, we know, and what we're trying to accomplish here is
yeah, because again,
The timeline in the
it might be better to plant, two sites, one that's going to be in one of these micro transit areas someday, might be a better long.
But I think it also pushes back, I think, Rachel, your concern's a good one, right? But if it's always about sort of like, well, the road is already clogged. And so we can't put more housing. Well, if we're planning transit, we're planning transportation through there. That might open up the development or restrict some of the opposition to it if they were to read our recommendations and care about them.
Okay, so I added or where transit is planned in red. Any other edits to this slide? And I'm starting to think that like, you know, maybe not in this meeting, but maybe next week, which is our last scheduled meeting. Maybe if we all feel comfortable at the end of today, maybe, you know, these first couple slides are things we vote on. I'm thinking, anyways. I'm gonna go to the next slide. All right, this is where it really gets interesting. So there are a lot of different tools that were proposed across the 5 subcommittees to encourage the developments that we just discussed we want to see more of. Specifically, there were funding tools, local zoning reform, streamlining the permitting process, having statewide construction codes, strengthening comp plan requirements, offering developer incentives, some recommendations specific to growing our construction workforce, and then some recommendations around optimizing programs and building capacity for things that already exist. So I'm going to go sort of one by one and touch on all of these tools. I did try to combine and summarize where it was possible, but some of these things just aren't easily combined. So for funding, there were a couple pretty specific recommendations that the state should appropriate $100 million to DSHA every year with future increases tied to consumer price index. That came from our finance and development subcommittee. Our community focus group subcommittee also recommended that the state match the National Housing Trust Fund allocation, which is about $3 million per year. So I kind of lumped those together. Then there was a recommendation around working across executive agencies to identify and maximize the use of all the federal and state funds that can anyway be used to support housing. Personally, I would also recommend adding in our entitlement jurisdictions because, you know, DSHA gets money for you know, community development block grant, but so does, you know, the city of Wilmington and so does Newcastle County. So I don't want us to forget that there are other entities aside from DSHA and DHSS that do get pots of money that can be used for housing. That would be my only personal recommendation here. And then Karen, I see your hand. I'll just read off these next 2 bullets and then allow you to chime in. There was a recommendation from Finance and Development about creating a mission-driven public-private development fund to increase the number and volume of low-cost loans that are available to affordable housing developers. And that idea comes to us from the Dallas Housing Opportunity Fund. And again, for Finance and Development, the idea of either allowing or encouraging municipal bond financing for affordable housing development. So Karen?
Basically, I guess I thought entitlement, you can add entitlement, but federal to me includes that entitlement funding. Because it's federal money.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So I said you can include entitlement jurisdictions, but to me, that really is the federal money that goes to the entitlement jurisdictions, is it not? So,
Well, yeah.
so I thought federal is just sufficient.
Right, but we would need to work with those entitlement jurisdictions because they have some of the money. You see what I'm saying?
I do, yes. So certainly you can add that as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
They do know.
And I'm gonna add this in red so everybody knows we're adding it live. Okay.
Good. Can you describe maybe something that's a little bit different from the Dallas Housing Opportunity Fund that is unique? Because the Housing Development Fund that DSHA has is technically public and private. Like private institutions are able to dump a whole heck of a lot of money in the HDF if they would like to. And we certainly would encourage that because of how DSHA is able to fund that out. Is there something different from what they are doing that's encouraging the public private? Yeah, sure, anybody can answer.
Yeah, so it's set up to work through a CDFI, so it's not, private institutions aren't gonna dump grant money into it. They're actually dumping lending capital that they'll get back, and so they can do that in the form of a loan or an investment. We can certainly take a grant as well, but for instance, a private foundation like a Longwood could take a portion of their portfolio and put it in there, and so they're getting a return off of that versus putting it in the market, for example. So it allows an opportunity to structure it in such a way that the private entity that's putting the funds in can get a rate of return similar to any sort of CDFI investment.
The return's very modest though, right?
It is a modest return, yeah.
So it's social investment.
So I've had some experience with some CDFIs and as an affordable housing developer. And you're getting market rate loans. You're getting some greater flexibility maybe on loan to value, but not really getting a break as far as the interest rate. And sometimes paying a little bit more for that interest rate. So that's why I caution, like, great CDFI, but like, as the developer, I'm not seeing the 2% loan. And that's to
Yeah.
do the affordable housing, I need the 2% loan. I don't need 6%, but I'm giving you a greater loan to value, and I'm not gonna be as much on your legal costs.
So I can add to that too. So you can blend the rate down with grant capital. And so in the case of the Dallas Housing Opportunity Fund, the state actually provided a large grant. And so that is going in there at basically 0%. So it blends the rate with the private investment to bring that down, and it requires that rate be blended down. So if you look at like the Grow Delaware loan programs that we have with National Development Council, those businesses are getting a much lower interest rate than what's available in the market because it blends the grant capital with the private capital to create a lower loan. So that's how Dallas did it. So I think there's ways of structuring it to make sure that the benefit passes through to the borrower.
Okay, I'd certainly like to see a lower interest rate, and that's why when you have the state and capitalize the state, if they lend out permanent lending at 1 or 2%, I think that would, that sort of equity, or that sort of loan infusion would, I think, do wonders. So do you think we could get it down to that level?
So like to 1%?
2?
I don't know. I mean, but if interest rates now for commercial loans are at 8%, if you can get it to 4%, that's still fantastic. I mean, I think 1 or 2 would be fantastic, but that might be unrealistic. It just depends on what the sources are and how well you can.
Was it also for just short term, like construction, or was it also for permanent? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay.
I think it's all in how you structure it. That's why it's kind of like Dallas, but
Okay.
It could be.
Dallas can do up to 18-year term.
yeah, it's Dallas 18-year. I think it's all in what you make it.
I was just gonna ask a question. I'm not a finance person, but I was just wondering about the scale. Is Delaware, is Dallas a much bigger place and therefore this works better than Delaware? Dallas probably has more population than Delaware does, more housing units. So I'm just throwing out there, is Delaware at a scale where this type of thing could work? Question. I don't know the answer. But.
Yeah.
I think that might be relative. We're 20,000 units. So I mean, Dallas might have more units that they're short, but we're 20,000 short in Delaware. And so yeah, our fund might not be $100 million fund, but like initially, but like I think it's relative in that regard.
Yeah.
So I think that if the state had the fund, if they presently don't go out, I don't think, and solicit other investors to invest in the HDF, but could be a possibility. Banks tend to not want to do long-term investment. I can tell you that, Russ in particular. They may do 3 to 5 year investments, and can be a variety of a couple of points over market, or or at what they borrow it at. So it's certainly a possibility to blend it. I think the key might be to get some foundation to do social investments at a lower interest rate that could be blended. And whether it's held by a CDFI or the state, again, I think either could possibly work. So.
Are there any edits people want on this slide before we move on to the next one? Not seeing any. All right, this next one, local zoning reform. Their zoning came up in, I feel like, every single subcommittee in some way, shape, or form. And so what's on this slide is my attempt to try to summarize and bring all those different pieces together that were. Yep.
The funding. Can you go back one more?
Yes. Yes.
That was a really audible groan, people. And it may be a yes or no answer, of course. In the conversations about the 100 million, I'm looking mostly, I think that came mostly out of your committee. Was there? Yeah. No, yours? Okay. So DSHA currently receives funding for the Affordable Housing Program, for the HDF base budget, for SRAP, for DDDs, new programs. Is it 100 million overall, or is this specifically tied to the development of affordable housing or housing more broadly?
We did a very simplistic calculation based on the average cost of a LIHTC unit. And looked at just specifically LIHTC. So, and how we kind of calculate it based on today's average cost. And the 19,000 plus units that we needed, we kind of came up with a back of the envelope number that we would need $100 million a year annually for 30 years in just LIHTC money. And now, granted, that would include, you know, and then that leverage another like 139 million of private sources, that sort of thing. So that would be like loan capital as well as other things coming from the state to kind of meet that demand of the 19,000 units. So it was just contemplating rental.
Affordable rental development specifically.
Mhm.
So I would perhaps recommend that be clarified.
Do that. And the recommendation that you guys passed was a little more specific, just for the sake of space. I didn't put the full thing, but happy to put it in so that it's more clear.
Yeah, and we did recognize that, you know, maybe someone other than us might want to take a deeper dive into those numbers to make sure that they're appropriate, but that's.
And the housing alliance has thrown out a number too,
Yeah, and we didn't.
but
we
it's
didn't-
still, but it's all,
Yeah.
but it's all about development.
It's all development, not
The 1%,
DD, yes,
the 1% is also essentially defined the way Amy has defined it.
yes.
And just one, just moment of caution on that. If you go from 0 to 60 in one cycle, which we didn't quite do that in 2023, but then there was a lot of money left over because we just need to realize we created a capacity system for dealing with $4 million. And then we got 8 times that in 2023. And then we went back down to, you know, where we were before. And I hated that signal, but I understood the reality too of it. So we want to make sure that we do it in a responsible manner.
Well, that's why Amy said $3 billion total.
Yeah, I think that doesn't consider, you know, the increase of the cost of construction, however, you know, I mean.
Four, maybe 5. Well, I just want to make sure that I was clear about the uses because I would imagine there's also going to be advocacy on the other buckets, the state rental assistance and other parts, and yeah.
So Rep. Johnson and I had an opportunity to attend a workshop and listen to some folks from Massachusetts. And they're putting together a bond bill that deals with affordable housing and their housing crisis at $5.8 billion.
What's their total annual budget?
It's a lot more than ours.
No, but I mean, like, what's the equivalent number in Delaware?
Is it like 1% about? Is it not 1% of their budget about?
That's a good point, because I think, and I wonder if this is the place to put, you know, one of the recommendations was also to examine the amount of the bond cap that is allocated for affordable housing at the state level to see if maybe more bonding authority might be necessary to catch up to. I don't know if this is the place for it, if you have it elsewhere, so.
Karen?
So my perspective on the 100 million was to provide a shock value. That we need to get 100 million at least to get the production to a reasonable level to produce enough units. We did it based on LIHTC, yes, on rental, but I think it was, if we could give DSHA $100 million, what could we do with it, basically? You know, I think it was, again, just to, let's raise the ante of what we need for housing in this state.
And to speak to the up and down that you brought up, Russ, a little bit, I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about with the coalition, with our Affordable Housing Coalition partners, is the need for it to be predictable, right? Like the 130 million shot might have been a 500% increase or whatever, but knowing that it was temporary, knowing that it was a one-time shot in the arm meant that in future, like developers it doesn't attract external developers to come and build more. It doesn't incentivize existing developers to build their capacity to build more. So I think one time is good, but I want to emphasize the importance of predictable, regular, sustained year over year so that people can be planning their developments in advance, 3, 4, 5 years out.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has an annual budget of over 50 billion. So it's about 10, I would say a 10-to-1 ratio.
I mean, so,
It's about 1%.
yeah, no, it's,
And Russ, to your point about, I mean, yeah, there's a capacity issue too. And that's why then next we're talking about zoning and these other things too that have to be remedied to get capacity in the market.
So at this point, I thoroughly regret bringing us back to the.
I think that was Kevin's way of judging us.
I want the number to change.
Before we move real quick,
Don't reduce it.
before we move real quick,
Rachel.
the 3 million, I just want to say, the match for the National Housing Trust Fund dollars, the importance of that, I think, given whether or not the Housing Trust Fund continues or not at the national level, is just to ensure that some of what the state is investing is dedicated to the housing needs of the most vulnerable folks. So whether that's
I would
part
actually
of the
rather that the
100,
recommendations. say
right,
that.
so I think, given uncertainty at the federal level, we might want to just say, make sure there's attention paid to some type of set aside. We don't need to put the number on there for like people with disabilities, the vulnerable population, people with incomes at 30% or below the area median income, right? The
I
lowest.
would recommend that you remove the reference. I mean, that was probably
Yeah,
developed
yeah.
before
The
the
election.
election, and I mean, the Housing Trust Fund, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is funded with proceeds from Fannie and Freddie activity, right? Isn't that still how it works, right? And so it is variable based on, first of all, their mortgage production and status and their duty to serve requirements that I expect will change.
Yeah, so some type of.
Words, date,
I would just put, funding must consider the needs of
The most vulnerable.
extremely low income. Are we still using the ELI language?
the needs of the most.
Vulnerable / ELI households.
Household / ELI.
Supportive housing is usually also very specifically to meet the needs of people with disabilities, so I'd like that word somewhere in there too. Vulnerable households, ELI households / household with disabilities.
Household with disability.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
All right.
I think Representative Johnson.
Yeah, so Representative Johnson is going to work to keep us not only on task, but also on time, okay? So that we all know, we used an hour, we've only gotten through 6 of these categories.
All right, moving on.
We have 9 categories left. That gives us approximately 6 to 8 minutes per category if we want to get through all of these today. Okay? So I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward. And if we're okay with not getting through all of the categories, keep that in mind as well. Okay? 11:28, go.
Thank you. So. Moving on to the next slide. So again, I tried to combine all of the various zoning related recs across 5 subcommittees and put it into one big idea. And so I think what we are saying collectively is we want local jurisdictions to update their zoning and land use ordinances to do the following: increase allowable density of residential development in investment levels 1 and 2, increase the types of dwellings that are permitted, that are treated as permitted uses in investment levels 1 and 2, ensure ministerial approval of by right projects, those that are permitted uses, reduce or eliminate parking requirements in high density areas, especially near transit, and to ensure that residential bulk standards, that's our minimum lot sizes and setbacks, ensure that those standards do not prevent a developer from developing to the maximum allowable density. Now, I know Mike and David had shared an exchange with the whole group yesterday with some more specificity related to this. I had printed that out for folks. Sorry for those of y'all online. You should have it in your email if you're a full task force member. But I'll just open it up for you guys to.
Well, I just had two comments on the slide. Since on the previous slide, we talked about where to encourage development, we kind of walked through those
Change the language to
locations.
that.
It was conformed throughout the
We
entire.
can really,
Yeah, change
we
the
don't need to
language
be
to
that
that.
specific in these recommendations, so we can probably eliminate those references. That's number one.
So just strike through.
Where is in the other slide?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I would strike that stuff.
Okay.
And then the second comment was, I think, yes, we spent a lot of time saying local jurisdictions should update zoning, but we did talk about the state establishing some local requirements, which is the recommendation that I had emailed out.
That was gonna be my question, is like, how do you force the local jurisdictions to do this?
Money.
Usually money, or you mandate it. I mean, that's, you can do it two different ways.
It's the carrot versus
Well,
the stick.
that's an implementation question, I think, more than a.
So maybe that comes to a future, there's a future slide on that, is there not? I thought I saw something on implementation, no, maybe not. I thought
I guess I should phrase it as a question. Is that an implementation or a recommendation question?
I think I think it's key to this, because I think the challenge, and it came up in all of our conversations, was about how not all, but many local jurisdictions are unwilling to modify their local zoning rules, and that there needs to be the state that sets some minimum standards that they're required to either adopt, or there's an incentive / carrot approach to incentivize them to adopt.
So it feels like these bullets, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all about the what, right? The outcome. Is that fair?
They're not about the how.
Right. So is it,
Do we have how in the other slides or not?
If we have a house somewhere else, then we can deal with it there, but.
So I met with our co-chairs to talk about all of this synthesis, and I thought we wanted to maybe move away from the worrying about the how and just putting out there what we want to happen. So
Yeah, I mean,
well, true, but I think that maybe we're hearing that it needs, that this is a place where we need to zig from that zag, and maybe it's an additional, I think maybe it's an additional bullet though. So we want to see all of this, and what you're saying is, and the task force recognizes that the state may need to play a.
I thought, those were our discussions in at least two of the committees that I was involved in. I will also say that is a national trend that is happening across the country.
we ended the regulatory permitting was the idea that there has to be something that is both providing carrots to local governments that allow them, some funding or some assistance in doing the things that are being asked, but also some stick that's the backstop that, they must do it or else something else happens. And I think Mike and I had this email exchange yesterday with some language that put some numbers and some densities and things. That's one way to look at it. And I think Sarah is our representative from a local government here, and it's, none of this is easy on behalf of a local government. There's cost, there's political will, there is a lot of technical work that goes into these ordinances. This is not just because you know how to write them. I'll speak for the other, local governments, the 57 municipalities They don't have necessarily a planning department or a planner. They have to hire lawyers to do this, and they don't necessarily know the technical, ins and outs of how to get it done. So I think there will need to be some assistance given to the local governments to accomplish this, and some rationale for them to want to do it.
Well, I just want to add too, the impetus for the email that I sent yesterday was in our last full task force meeting. I thought we were charged with adding some specificity around some of the requirements that our subcommittee had come up with, specifically around lot sizes and density and those kinds of things. So that was the reason behind sending the email yesterday, was to provide that specificity. I assume this document, Caitlin, this is not the final document of
No.
the task force. This is
just
the
to help
highlights.
us bring it all together.
So we, whether or not we capture my email and the exchange Dave and I had yesterday in this particular document probably isn't necessary. I think these bullet points do capture that, but I do think it is absolutely critical that we highlight that there must be more state level involvement to ensure that these things happen.
So,
I agree.
yeah, so there are a couple different pathways that we are looking at to assist the local jurisdictions in this sort of aspect. I think having the notes as far as what this task force thinks are good points to start from, I think is going to be important. I think we'll live in that document. And then I'm debating like 2 or 3 different ways on how to introduce either a bill or epilogue or something of that nature to get us to the point where we're offering the carrots for the local municipalities. But having this out there, even because we won't be able to serve all 57 jurisdictions at one time, at least some of these things will be out there in a living, breathing document, that some of those jurisdictions who want to do something but might not be part of like an initial group of zoning reform could still pick out, be like, okay, we see some of this. I think we can do this without that aspect of things and incorporate it. So I think having this stuff is important to list.
I'd like to add that I think it's important to not just, I guess I don't have the original in front of me, but my understanding is the recommendation and the detailed recommendation that came out of the committee was both incentives and enforcement mechanisms and sticks. And so I think we need to have incentives, we need to have support, we need to have carrots, we need to have help with zoning, planning help. But we also need sticks to make sure it happens. I think both are necessary.
Yes. Well, and again, the email I sent yesterday, I'm assuming this was a revision of the recommendation that was in the subcommittee that went through regulatory and permitting. So
Yeah, we stopped,
specific
our
recommendation.
committee stopped short of the detail that Mike, you provided yesterday, and I added some thoughts too.
Right.
And if the ask is, what are the numbers that we need to aspire to? This further thing is a good place to start having that conversation. I thought your numbers were fine, but that's a conversation to have with local governments and with, others about, is this something that's doable? Is this, how do you react to this? But I think from a technical standpoint, these are numbers developers, certainly would respond to.
But I think it's also important that we understand why you have to have the carrots and stick and why the state has to get involved. Think about there's a lot of consensus in this room along affordable housing. You grab the last 10 homes Shaw Brothers sold and put those people in this room and say, how would you feel about affordable housing next year development?
Probably not.
So politically, the mayor of Lewis is getting elected by my home buyers, not by the people in this room. So there's going to be no political will when they start having public hearings about all this affordable housing stuff they want to do in their town. The people that show up and that are going to speak on it are going to be adamantly against it. We have to give those local jurisdictions cover to say, hold on a sec. If we don't do this, we can't get any of that 100 million that they just passed. And that's all going to go to other towns or other jurisdictions. And if we don't do this, the state's going to start withdrawing the funds for X, Y, and Z. They need that political cover. This isn't going to happen.
So it sounds like there's general agreement, as you just said, among this task force. So I think the question is, how do we express that? Is it as a sort of another layer of recommendation in this particular piece, this segment, or is it?
Well, I think when we talked about it, it was about, establish statewide minimums to do these things,
Okay.
right? That was kind of the language that we were using, establish statewide minimums
Okay.
and then list these bullet points. So I think if you did it that way, that's
So
probably
is it
sufficient
in
for this
that
document.
introductory clause there, local jurisdictions should update their zoning and land use ordinances / regulations? You know,
Yeah, I mean, you
In
could.
order
to qualify
These
for,
bullet points are the generalities, and the document that Mike and I were working on is some more specifics. And do we want to include the specifics in at this level, or?
I mean, you
No, I don't
could,
think we can. I don't think we have time.
Yeah.
Let's just acknowledge there
Yeah,
will be
I think we
specifics.
acknowledge this,
Okay.
and then also somewhere in here
should be a bullet.
should be something about the how, which is carrots and sticks are gonna be necessary, and cover for local governments and assistance to local governments and all that. I mean, that, I think we go back to our original recommendation,
it's
that
got it.
that was in there. So.
Let's use I mean, we could use this sentence, implement a zoning reform framework that provides for both incentives and enforcement mechanisms. Such framework should establish statewide minimum requirements for local governments to follow while offering local governments a menu of options from which to choose. And that would be the introductory paragraph.
Boom, put that bullet point right here on the top, and I think that covers it. Cause that was, yeah.
Some state in our committee, some state did exactly this.
Yeah.
And did a really good job of like laying out the way you can qualify. You must meet 3 of the 5 following criteria. Must meet- What state was that?
Utah?
This is why I hate being on a Zoom, guys. I can't even get a word in, you guys. You could have easily just, like, I think I agree with all of what you're saying. I think you could simply say something like state must request and assist local jurisdictions and you know, the carrots and the sticks could be in there too, but I just, anyway. I'm sorry, but I'm in Florida and I can't be there, but it's really frustrating to be on a Zoom and not be able to get a word in wise, or just say that, so.
Yeah, feel free to just yell at us, so we can hear you.
We miss you, but we know you're having a good time.
So am I hearing correctly that we want sort of our opening clause to read just like the opening part of the regulatory and permitting recommendation on zoning? And then still keep the bullets that are there
Yeah.
with the strike throughs, because we've already covered that.
Yep.
Okay, and then am I also hearing that we maybe, in addition to these bullets, want to incorporate some of the more specific numbers from this more recent exchange,
I
or
don't think
no?
we need to do that if you're telling me there's gonna be some other final document that has the
Okay.
more detailed recommendations from the subcommittees. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah, so one thing I do want to note is every single one of the 71 recommendations from the subcommittees will be in the final report, right? We're not going to hide any of the work of the subcommittee. So people will be able to see everything that passed from each subcommittee exactly as it was passed. I'm trying to figure out what is the full task force voting on?
So the only comment there then is this proposal was a revision of one of the subcommittee's
Right.
recommendations. So we don't have time to send it back to a subcommittee to vote on it.
Right.
This committee, I would imagine, could certainly say, yes, we want to revise it.
Yes, okay. So then maybe for our next meeting, we, draft this up and make it
Yes.
something we can vote on. Okay.
Jerry Heisler, I apologize for not being in the first hour of the meeting. I couldn't make it, but one word I'm not hearing with zoning is inclusionary. And I think I look at zoning as an exclusionary process. It excludes things, not includes things. And when I think of affordable housing at all levels, at this point, it has to be inclusionary, because in Newcastle County above the canal, there's just not enough land to do what we need to be done. And we're going to have to go in the areas that typically have not even been thought of including affordable housing. So to me, almost in the preamble, we need to think of affordable housing as being an inclusionary. And if this has already been brought up, I apologize.
No, I don't think anybody actually said those words, but there is, aspects of inclusionary or, ensuring all our jurisdictions are carrying their fair share of the burden of, not even the burden, the necessity of affordable housing.
I want to say something too. I think that that's a good point, especially in the more urban areas where there is density. But given market conditions, affordable housing may not be included in as much of the developments going on. And so I think the inclusionary piece tries to grab some of that aspect. You think of Wilmington, so there's been a lot of downtown development, but how much of that is affordable?
Could we maybe add the mention of inclusionary zoning under our types of developments we want to encourage? Like, is that a logical place?
Well, I'm not thinking inclusionary at the point of 20% inclusionary in a single subdivision. I'm talking about the zoning category has to include affordable housing as part of its composition. And that is a little bit different. I think the problem we get into, we think of zoning as layering, and I want to look at this as just a changing of the format of that layer where it's homogeneous throughout and not just sectioned off in 20% of it. And that's a whole different concept that people really aren't used to. And as much as that's a theory and is being practiced in some areas, I'm finding the term inclusionary has different meanings. We tend to use it, inclusionary housing, let's put 20% in. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the district includes affordable housing as a footprint. And otherwise we'll never meet our thresholds and demand. That's very clear to me.
I think some of the detail in what,
Regulatory.
yeah, some of the detail that was written out and shared by email around the local zoning reform got into that. About like a menu of options, and you have to do some of them. Like that's, to me, that's more,
That's where
that would like come into the how part, I guess, that it's like one of the options. Maybe if like the Utah model is followed, you could, does that make sense? In terms of where it fits?
Is it more than just increasing the density to allow multiple types of units and housing types? I mean, that's a technical way to address allowing things, is increasing that density and allowing different housing types. I mean, inclusionary zoning is a particular thing that's that 20% for that percent number versus what we're, I think, saying is that all zoning should be flexible enough to enable and allow higher densities where it makes sense and multiple unit types and higher heights and smaller lot sizes so that, instead of one single family home, you can build 3 in the same land instead of, a duplex, you could build a small apartment building, and not that everybody will, but you have that included just as a matter of right.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, but using architectural standards.
Right.
So you don't have somebody putting up a steel house against a brick house and things of that nature to keep continuity. Correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm gonna try to get us back on track a little bit here. Does anybody have any specific edits to these recommendations that we haven't made yet?
Okay, cool. Moving on to the next slide.
Guys, we spent 15 minutes on that,
Okay,
just so we're clear.
I'm hoping this one is quicker. So
Okay.
there, 3 of our subcommittees, finance and development, regulatory and permitting, and construction, all had recommendations about making it easier to get through the permitting process. What I have on the slide is my attempt to bring it all together. I also want to acknowledge that I think this information overlaps with the charge of Executive Order 4's working group. So I think that may be the vehicle through which this gets done. But I think what we were saying across these 3 subcommittees is we want state agencies and local governments to work together to streamline the process, including developing maximum timelines for approvals, expediting projects that meet affordability criteria, allowing developers to utilize pay-for-review processes where they exist for different permits, waiving fees for projects that meet affordability criteria in certain areas. If we want to take out the area reference, we can, and allowing residential development in those areas that are properly zoned, compatible with the comp plan. allowing them to opt out of plus if they don't want to go through plus.
Any issues with changing the investment 1 and 2 like we did before?
Yeah.
You're just gonna take it out?
Make it sames or areas or as
Any
you
other,
drive.
any other questions or comments about these?
So I like this and I'm ready to move forward. My only other comment is the plus issue wouldn't be a problem if the county or the jurisdiction would accept our applications prior to us going to plus. Plus is only an issue because we have to wait.
Timing.
Yeah, so like if you could just get Sussex County and the local jurisdictions to say, well, because I gotta wait 12 months at Sussex County anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll let applications.
I know I'm one of the, in the minority where I don't mind plus. But, and Mike and I disagree about this. But I'd be fine with plus, I'd even be more fine with it if it didn't delay my process.
So we have that
Okay.
relationship with Kent County and we could do that with other local jurisdictions as well. We could also, if there was some desire to exempt affordable housing projects from plus and it's, you know.
Anyway, just leave it the way it's written, but that's just.
Yeah, he wanted to run concurrent.
So we're good with the last bullet.
All right,
Yes.
well, I'll just ask whether permitting process is the right term. Shouldn't it be approval and permitting process?
That's fair.
We're talking about zoning approvals too, right?
So to streamline the approval
/ permitting
/
process.
permitting process.
But at the
Okay.
headline.
And the title too.
Oh, okay, title, gotcha. Streamline the
It's a good thing of, yeah.
/ Okay. Thank you for that.
That was only like.
We're like.
Good job, I'm so sorry.
This is also easy. Three subcommittees said we need a statewide building code. Construction also recommended statewide energy code. Community focus groups wants our codes to keep accessibility in mind.
Just to be clear on the energy code, we already have a statewide energy code. What
Oh,
our
we do.
recommendation was not to adopt the next version, that we need to hold on 2018.
And the, okay, sorry, so the,
On this one. So would it be?
No, you can't ask.
Well,
Kendra, the representative Johnson said no.
Statewide building code, that's all.
I thought, so sorry, you said we have a statewide energy code, but I thought, I remember very clearly last meeting, you were talking about different jurisdictions having different energy codes.
Different building codes, not different energy
Different
codes.
person, different years.
Okay,
trying
cool.
to fix it, right?
Okay.
Adopt statewide building code and the 2018 energy code. For
So yes, currently we have one statewide energy code. We're on 2018. There's been discussions about possibly moving to the current versions of the code, which would add tremendous cost to every housing product in the state.
Not to mention it has to grandfather everything. Like I have a really quick story, but at Dutchman's Harvest, which is an affordable housing project, the city of Lewis changed the code they wanted to use after our building was fully designed, applied it to us, and we had to make this, our stair tread just a little bit wider. We had to completely redesign and redo the plans for all of our buildings. It took us 6 to 8 months to get in, and that kind of stuff is the enemy of affordable housing. And that's a specific example to show you how. So they need to like use the same code, and when they do adopt it, they need to say anything that's even remotely in the process right now is grandfathered on the code in which it was originally designed for.
So, and maintain 2018 energy code, I think that's what is being
I wanna get-
recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah, some space to talk here.
Yes, the state energy office is in the process of working on updating the energy codes and have heard the concerns regarding 2018 to 2021 versions. And we are looking to move forward with adopting the 2024, which provides more of the flexibility that people were looking for that were not in the 2021 version. So I would have concerns about maintaining the 2018 because we are looking to move forward with 2024.
We don't agree.
No, I understand, I understand.
But we understand that is what you're
Yes.
doing.
Less.
Yeah, Mike, I guess I just have further clarification I want on this. So for instance, let's just take the issue of a mandate on sprinkler systems. Who is going to determine now? Is it going to be the legislature that won't be included, for instance?
Right, so, but that's also part of the problem, right? So because this building code, the IRC, is adopted by local jurisdictions, It means that essentially you have to deal with 60 versions of the same building code. It also means that every time a new jurisdiction decides to adopt the new or the latest IRC, which includes requirement for residential sprinklers as a default, you then have to go to that local jurisdiction and obviously convince them that that is not a good idea. And that flies in the face of providing affordable housing. So it also creates a lot of uncertainty and predictability for folks that are building typically across all of these different jurisdictions, right? So they're going to build in likely cost to deal with uncertainty and lack of predictability. Yes, I think it would, I guess the how would be a question mark. The energy code is not adopted by the legislature. It goes through a process, but I believe it's spelled out how DNREC has to go through that process. And I would suggest that the building code could go through a similar adoption process and wouldn't have to go through the legislature every cycle.
So why don't we, can we back out then? It doesn't sound like the task force is completely in agreement on the year. Maybe we need to talk in our recommendation more about the statewide nature of it, a unified, adoption of building codes that promote real estate development by standardizing. Maybe that's the better word. Maybe we should be standardizing our building and air and energy codes across the state, so that we maybe avoid getting into the process and long drawn out conversations or disagreement within the task force about which codes, but make the statement that standardizing has value.
In the same way that we subsidize affordable housing, are there, money? Is there money that can be used to say, okay, we want to go from 2018 to 2024, it's going to increase the cost in these ways, and for affordable housing projects, we're going to subsidize that cost, we're going to pay for it. Like, is there a way to build that into changes that are made? I don't know at all about energy money.
And
None
how
of
would
this, DSHA's building codes.
That's virtually what's done anyway. I mean, because
okay.
the cost to build is here, what
Okay.
someone can afford is here, and so the state
And
subsidizes.
so,
So if we make it more expensive, and this person still can only afford this, that's more money the state needs to subsidize. I mean, so that's basically it in a nutshell. So,
And I would be curious what DSHA's light tech construction standards looks like against the 18 or the 21 or the 24. Did I get those words right? I don't know. In some cases, we may even exceed.
I don't really like the first bullet item. I mean, the energy codes are standardized across the state. We have one state energy code, so that already exists. We don't believe certainly going to 2021 is not good. 2024 is better than 2021, but it's not great. And, we're talking about maintaining affordability, and we just don't feel that at this time, maybe you say at this time to it for now or something in this recommendation as it relates to the energy code. But as it relates to the statewide, to the building code, 3 different groups had suggested that we need a statewide building code. That's the goal. The how, I'm not sure we got to get into that right now, but that is the goal that 3 different subcommittees said we need to have for all the various reasons that we just.
But let's separate those 2 things out. Let's
Yeah,
have
really
that
2
sub
separate
bullet.
issues.
Yeah, they really are. So
I have this is a really interesting topic, and I have a different perspective, having manufactured housing over some of the units 40 years, looking at inexpensive wall systems compared to really expensive envelope systems. The fact is, if you don't build a good building envelope, somebody has a more expensive operating cost, so you're taking money out of their operating budget. So there's a balance here we have to get to, and I don't think specifying an energy code is the best way to do it. We have to get very efficient housing in the field so people have very low operating costs. That's the goal, in my opinion. I don't know how we phrase that, but just focusing on the energy code, I don't personally building a lot of units and installing modular units and doing mobile home units. I'm not sure that's really the right approach. We have to have a process here, getting the right HVAC equipment, if they have air conditioning in place, all the different components of this, just not the energy code. Because I want somebody to be in a home that has money to spend and not give it to DP&L or Chagrin or some of these other companies. That's what I'm concerned about as from affordable housing. And I see tremendous bills in the last month with people that live in mobile homes, modular homes, rental homes, and that scares me. It's a really complicated issue.
Yeah.
Not to make things even more complicated, but my colleague just reminded me that there is a feasibility study happening right now on adopting a statewide building code. Kim, do you know anything about that from your shop?
Could you say that one more time? Because someone from my team is sending me messages as well about the.
Yeah, so there's and my colleague Vanessa is here too and knows a little bit about it. There's a feasibility study, I think, already happening to see if it's possible to do a statewide building code.
They're typing, I don't have the exact answer right now.
Okay.
Hang on, speak to that very briefly if it's appropriate. The Nature Conservancy and Seagrant are collaboratively looking to do a 3-year feasibility study on what the implication of a statewide building code would be in Delaware. And it was supposed to start in January through BRIC funding, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, it's a FEMA grant. But I believe the beginning date was delayed due to the freezes. So I don't know if it's started already, but it should be like, well, not early. But if you agree or not.
Can I just, because we still have some more to get through and I know we're running tight on time. So we want to adopt, so I think the recommendation just goes back to what it was originally.
Yeah, just get rid of the maintained 18, that red line.
Yeah, get rid of the maintain the 2018, get rid of the standardize, because we know we have work to do in this area and there's elements in there and I appreciate Jerry's thoughts on this, like to also maintain affordability for those owners or for those renters, having high efficiency units, which cost more, also has less operating costs. And there are funding sources out there that are attracted to that, so that they're part of the equation as well. So, I mean, it's not just the original capital, but it's also the ongoing, especially for lower income families. All right,
The other recommendation that was made by someone else, and I'm sorry, I'm on Zoom, so I'm not sure, but making sure that we have, the goalposts don't change, where if you've started a project and the codes are revised in the process, because it can take years, that you're not having to update your plans to an updated code, because it may change in the future. I know that can cost a ton of money when you're planning for one thing and midway through something changes, and then you're now bound by new code. So I think that's an important part as well.
So do we like what it says now? Enough to move on to the next slide.
And if you want to incorporate that, and it was Preston that mentioned it, through the life of the project. So when you originally make that application, that those are the codes that you're frozen with.
Okay.
It's like grandfather.
This may be a good, like a separate bullet, because that also would work with the redevelopment code. So if we're in the process of a project, we want to make sure that that project is grandfathered into the codes in place at the start of the development or redevelopment.
So apply same.
Code changes and adoption should be implemented in a way that it counts for or doesn't disrupt existing projects in the pipeline.
Is
We have to
this
figure out what that start date is, right? I mean, you can't say, well, in 10 years, I was planning to do something there.
Isn't it like if the code changes while you're in the process of developing that you're grandfathered into the previous code, something like that?
Can we just leave this sort of placeholder language and move on?
That's fine. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a lot. All right. Strengthen comprehensive plan requirements. This was talked about mostly within the context of the regulatory and permitting subcommittee. This is just sort of a summarized version of two recommendations that were passed by regulatory and permitting. The first idea is just updating plan requirements so that when local jurisdictions are making these plans, they have current accurate housing data, and that their implementation and zoning reforms are supported by their goals. We also want those comp plans to actually identify enough land and to put the housing in sufficient density so that we're actually meeting the local needs. And then there's an idea of having a pilot program through state planning to help local governments implement their affordable housing elements of their comp plans using master planning as a tool. So that's the main idea on this stuff. Okay, I'm seeing heads nodding, shaking. I'm not hearing, oh, Senator?
Yeah, so so I get the comprehensive plan requirements and having a pilot program for state office planning. And sometimes those are just, warm and fuzzy goals. And I think, and since we were specific in the pilot program, I would just go to the local zoning reform and maybe copy that program, that line there in the local zoning reform as well. And not necessarily under OSPC, not Office of State Planning, but at least, there should be a pilot program, set up for local zoning, because that's really where the rubber hits the road.
All right.
So to
That's
go
a different thing.
back to this slide and add there's,
Program to assist local governments.
okay.
So
Pilot
nothing against that slide, it just, that language, keep me in on the other one, that's the recommendation.
Good. I agree.
All right, so pilot program to assist local governments in implementing zoning reform
Yes.
or
This slide for all the things we're doing with
affordable housing. Okay. All right, so now that we've added that to this slide, is there anything else we need to talk about on this slide or change? Hearing none, moving on. All right, developer incentives. Obviously, this came up a lot across various subcommittees. My takeaway is we want both the state and local governments to provide incentives to developers that are constructing affordable housing. What does that look like? It could look like at the state level, allowing affordable housing projects to take advantage of site readiness fund, fee reductions or waivers, which I think could happen at both the state and local level. Density bonuses, I think that has to happen at the local level. Ditto for parking requirements.
So could this be an opportunity to talk about some of the energy code requirements?
You might have to repeat that.
Yeah, yeah, I was just wondering if this is an opportunity to talk about a reduction in some of the energy code requirements that add to the cost of affordable construction.
Complex, so.
Nah,
I wouldn't bring it.
Let's say no.
Because sometimes that long-term affordability thing that Jerry was mentioning, so I think we're still a lot like.
Also, you do qualify for lower interest rate permanent financing when you do include some of the energy components. Like, so we do it anyway, both to be good guys and because our interest rate on our HUD financing goes down by 25 basis points, which is a big difference.
The one thing I would suggest is that there be some type of land investment fund. If our goal is to, if for rental housing, for example, mitigate the ability for landlords to increase rents really significantly, maybe there's a state fund that subsidizes land or buys part of the land with the developer, and that's a way to mitigate rental increases. Because one of the biggest components of our cost is land and site work. And if that can be sort of quarantined off in a way and subsidized by the state, and there are restrictions are put on the developer for rental product to increase rents to some extent, I think there'd be a lot more comfort out there.
Jerry, a previous slide, we talked about state properties, and I think that might be the best avenue to do
All right,
that
that's
with.
fine. Sorry I said anything.
No, it's okay, no, it's
So,
good.
so expedited permitting shouldn't be on this list because it was somewhere else, but.
Well, so we had that,
Whole slide about streamlining.
Streamline
Yeah.
permitting process.
Okay, so yeah, I don't wanna.
But they are also, it's also incentive, but.
And like by right zoning shouldn't be on this list. This is for like the.
Then we already covered it.
We're moving on.
Every municipality to waive impact fees and all this other stuff from the building. We have like one in Newcastle County that does that. Like, why don't they all do it?
So like the parking requirement that's here, this is under incentives, but really, should that just be under the zoning reform? Reduce, right? I mean, that's just really, we're not saying reduce parking for just affordable, we're saying we need to reduce parking across the board.
Yeah,
Are we good with striking it?
yeah, I don't know where that
Yes.
is. That makes me nervous.
Just
So-
doesn't.
Okay.
it doesn't fit.
We can take it out. Okay, anything else on this particular slide? Cool, moving on. This next one is pretty easy. Mike, I didn't, copy the entire recommendation about the, changing the funding structure, but, just for the sake of facing
Just
slides.
to clarify just a little bit though.
Yeah,
Right
Give me the
now,
words.
for those that don't know, the funding structure for this workforce development goes, it rolls through DOE when it's really a DOL, Department of Labor controlled process. So what our group had recommended doing was shifting that funding under DOL instead of going through.
Yeah.
okay.
That's all. I just want that clarity.
Okay. I think the first two bullets are pretty self-explanatory. All right, I'm moving on to the next slide. All right, there were a number of recommendations, from a couple different subcommittees about optimizing or reviewing current programs, specifically ones within DSHA, but also, DelDOT looking at their manuals. So that's the main idea. Open to feedback, edits.
I know you have minimum construction standards. Do we also want to include useful life schedule?
Looking at that.
Or would that just be assumed that if you're looking at the construction standards, you're also looking at the useful life schedule that.
We can add it. Okay.
I think the other aspect here that's missing from the conversations we had were really the products themselves. So it's not just on LIHTC, for example, it's getting feedback on what programs are offered and because right now there is the developer forum that takes place on LIHTC. And so the idea was also to include other products, making sure people have an opportunity to get feedback on them and whether they're effective or what else might be needed, that sort of thing, or where there are barriers.
Does this lead-in sentence get to that enough, or? I'm happy to wordsmith, I just don't know where to kind of stick that.
There's multiple programs.
Just want to add a bullet that's including identifying other barriers. So it's kind of a catch-all.
Yeah, I feel like to some extent it also suggests that there are existing programs too, and so. Maybe gap or opportunities for new products or programs.
Okay, so identifying other barriers to
Development of any or all affordable housing or of
development.
any.
So, yeah, barriers to development under our programming, but then I'm also hearing, we want to identify opportunities for new programming.
Yeah, potentially.
Like to see our subcommittee's recommendation about SRAP under GSHA. It is subsidizing affordable housing on the operating side, not the development side, but it is an important mechanism for affordable housing access. And I know our subcommittee had a recommendation about like evaluating how well SRAP is reevaluating SRAP and considering funding for it.
That's right. I'm just gonna put that as a placeholder. We can work on the language in between meetings. Okay, any other additions or line edits? All right, cool, moving on. All right, we only have 2 more slides. We're getting there. So
I know, so I'm excusing myself. You guys were so close. I know you could do it.
Thank you.
Do it. I have another meeting, guys.
all right, so, obviously up to this point, we've been talking about recommendations that are pretty, squarely about increasing supply and production, but some of our subcommittees noted that while we're hopefully building all these new units, we need to help people right now that are already struggling. So some of those recommendations that came out of community focus groups were funding for a permanent sustainable statewide emergency rental assistance program, legislation to seal eviction records, which is a huge barrier to accessing rental housing for some folks, greater availability of vouchers, including for our manufactured homeowners / tenants, wraparound supports. I could go on, but I was just trying to capture the big things here on this slide. Does anybody feel strongly that we need to add things here?
I thought when we discussed it, there was consensus that we didn't want to seal eviction records and we wanted to leave it up to the discretion of the landlords as to whether to consider those or not. Like, for some reason, I thought some of these recommendations got canceled out in our discussion of them earlier. I know that for me, like, I want as much information as I can get. And if I want to dig into a certain item, I'll call the prospective tenant and say, tell me about this eviction you had 4 years ago and why. And they'll say, well, my wife got sick and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, we're going to ignore it. But to have it untold or hidden, I kind of have a problem with.
I
So the
agree.
recommendation specifically was with regards to sealing the record after 7 years. Just like is done with a lot of different things in people's records, but also when an eviction is filed against someone and it's ultimately not, they're not, right word, I'm not a. The judgment is not against them, that shouldn't even be something that can be taken into account, because what a lot of landlords are doing, and property owners, especially like big corporate property owners that own like multiple buildings and manage multiple buildings, they're running these reports that anytime there's a type of flag, it just automatically filters those folks out and they don't get the type of treatment that you're talking about. And so that's what this is intended to try to avoid.
So there's legislation right now being introduced exactly on this issue. And I think I was told it was going to be at 5 years. And I'm actually really nervous about it. I think there has to be a fair discussion about this. You shouldn't be going back 20 years. I agree if somebody hasn't had an issue before them, but if somebody is consistently being evicted, I think we have a right to know that.
We're talking
Can-
about
can we-
incentivizing housing production availability.
Debate necessarily the merits of the bill. I would like to ask the task force whether it feels as though any of these recommendations, and I think I've expressed my opinion at least to a few people, if not at the full task force level before, that are not specifically more tightly tied to production. I don't necessarily have a personal objection to any of these recommendations. My personal opinion is that of concern that it dilutes the recommendations of the task force because they are not tied specifically to the title, the production charge. I think that there may be a way for us to report these out as recommendations that came from committees that were not fully undertaken, and that might tamper some of the need to sort of win the argument on any one of them. And just say that these were ideas that, you know, committees discussed but were not taken up by the full task force. So that would be one possible path forward for some of these items that are a little on the periphery of our original charge. But I'm curious as to what the rest of
I
the task
also,
force.
just for, the concern from the apartment association, something like a legislation to seal certain eviction records, things like rent control, are not only not preserving the current affordable housing, it's likely going to cause the loss of existing affordable housing, because our ability to screen residents for their ability to pay, or our ability to collect on a judgment that we have, if it's not visible on their record, that also causes those issues, causes a loss of income that needs to be spread across all of the residents that are had. So some of these recommendations, I think, make it worse.
Someone's past eviction has really little to no bearing on their
Again,
ability to pay in the future.
I don't know. I don't see the tied to production.
So
That's my concern.
sorry,
I
Matt.
agree.
I think a lot of this is coming from the specific subcommittee charge for community focus groups. So while the broader charge for the task force was recommending ways to increase supply, community focus groups was specifically tasked with looking at supportive services and barriers for specific vulnerable populations, veterans, persons with disabilities, et cetera. And so I feel like, we put that subcommittee from the beginning in a tough spot, because what we were asking them to do was
Well, I
always
didn't, I
one
wasn't
step.
there.
Yeah. And that's true. So we had this broader charge, but then we saddled this specific subcommittee with an extra thing. And so I don't want that to get lost as to how we go forward as a full task force. I leave that all to you. And I will.
And that's why I asked the question, how does the full task force feel about these things that are, and, in my opinion, there's a lot of good recommendations that came out of that work. Maybe not all of them, maybe not exactly as recommended. But do we want to have that as part of our primary messaging as the task force?
Well, I think for the case of manufactured housing, we're faced with incredible gentrification pressures, and we want to stabilize it as an affordable housing product. And that's why wraparound services are really critical. So we're actually trying to stop it transitioning into a different form. And that was part of the thinking of putting wraparound services in there, which would be important for any product today, because we are seeing gentrification pressures at a really intensive rate. So I think each one of these has to be discussed on its own level and what the purpose is. And as gentrification continues to heat up, if we don't address it, we're not going to have any affordable housing at any level. And that's at least one of my biggest fears. And I'm seeing it at a really intense rate in manufactured housing today.
So I think because that task force was given such an unusual, a sort of a separate criteria that they had to discuss, that it should be included. I know we're saying all the recommendations are going to be included, but it should definitely have a place within the primary recommendations. We should come up with which ones we really care about clearly first or something.
I just have a problem that it's going to be used as an endorsement when the idea is not a good idea. And I don't want it to be seen as an endorsement by legislators of the idea.
And
Are
it
we
does
talking about
not,
just eviction or in general, Wes?
I'm
Are we
sorry,
talking about eviction?
specifically about the eviction records.
And I'm talking about the overall, not specifically eviction. So just be clear.
I also think that if any specific subcommittee recommendation is gonna get crossed off the list, we should vote it off the list, not just discuss it off the list. I think that's important. So there may be some people who have strong opinions about that might not represent the full task force. So if folks want to specifically not include some recommendations from our subcommittee, I would want to make sure to vote on it. The second thing I think comes back to, I guess, the structure of the report, right? Is like, if I think having a conversation, I very much agree that this and I'm glad this task force is focused on production. I think that's the most important part of this. But it's also about people, and people are really significantly impacted. So if we're recognizing there's no affordable housing, it's challenging for me to also then agree that people should therefore be punished for the rest of their lives for not being able to afford housing that we are sitting in this room saying it's not affordable, right? So to not include some type of protection for people in this housing crisis as we work our way out of it feels wrong. So whether all of the recommendations from our subcommittee make it somewhere, I don't have a strong feeling about, because I agree production is the priority. But I do think that if we're gonna choose to not include certain things or make a decision about what to elevate, that we should do that based on discussion and vote.
I would just add to, I know,
So, I'm sorry, I just wanna. So we were just, I think our opinion is that all of the recommendations as submitted by the subcommittees will be included in the report, in the final report.
Mhm.
But that there is sort of a front of the, I've been calling it the front of the book. That where we ought to, I mean, not, and especially now that we're winding down this presentation, review these. And I think then also, so I think we've gotten to a point where we have general consensus with most of this. And that even within that, we can do some prioritization. And the front of the book should focus on that. Because I know Senator Huxtable has said several times that, there's a lot of good that has come out of the work of the subcommittees that we want to make sure is captured and acknowledged. So keeping all of those recommendations, and I think whether they make it to the front of the book is what we're sort of talking about, I think.
So can I ask a question about the front of the book? So is the idea that the front of the book is what? I want it to be clear to whoever's reading the report what the group agrees on, right? Like there may be some other recommendations in other subcommittees that people disagree with, obviously. So is the idea that we're going to put things to the front of the book that we all agree are the priority? Is that what you're saying? There'll be some group decision making. These are the priorities that we all agree with. Everything else came out of the committees, but wasn't necessarily adopted. Is that the distinction?
Not necessarily passing judgment on. Yeah, I think that's what the back of the book looks like is, here's a list of the work.
Non-judgments.
Here's a list of the work of the subcommittees that were recommended to the full task force, but the full task force essentially recommends clearly these front things.
Yeah, because if you look at manufactured housing, there's 27.
Oh, no, I know.
And
Yeah. I'm just
they're
trying to
not all
understand,
listed in
if
most-
something isn't at the front, what does that mean? Is what I'm trying to understand.
I think we're gonna put what my recommendation on would be to have the appendix of everything that was approved by all the subcommittees. Enters into the appendix as presented to us, and there's no vote on us saying we don't want that in the appendix or not in the appendix. It's all going in there. So that's where I think we're heading. And even though we are doing some of these things here, supports for the short term, program optimization, statewide codes, some of that could even be boiled down into subcategories when the final report is presented. I think our exercise today was to kind of dialogue into consensus some of the things that we're talking about.
So my question.
I'm sorry, I interrupted Amy before. Can we go back to?
I just had just one, when the Finance and Development Committee was meeting and discussing the $100 million that we were going to recommend. We talked about what you discussed earlier about a capacity, right? The fact that, does it all come in at one time, that sort of thing. And as we were looking at that, we discussed the fact that, that is gonna, development occurs over time, but in the meantime, could those resources be utilized as rental assistance to help people who are in unaffordable units today be affordable, in a way that, meets their household income until those, units are brought on board. So I think if we're, discussing kind of immediate, needs for production, if the production isn't there, and we don't talk at all about like, how do you help people continue to pay their rents in an unaffordable way, then there is in my opinion, there's a gap there, because, they have units and that's fantastic. They just can't afford them. So how can I think we should from a gap perspective, be thinking about how can we support them in the short term until we bring these units on board, because we know that there is such a significant gap for a lot of households.
But that's, we've got things that I think we all agree on is the emergency rental assistance. We have bills in place, our voucher mandate is starting in a few months, I guess, 9 months. Just from those that provide rental housing, legislation to seal certain eviction records is going to cause the cost of housing to increase. And that is against the mandate. We're not producing additional housing by doing that. We're potentially reducing the amount of affordable housing. And I know in certain slides, we have struck things out that, we felt were kind of muddying the waters. So again, I think that's the one thing on here that is problematic.
So maybe things that we, like the thing, if we're saying one of these short-term supports that there tends to be consensus on is the funding for a statewide rental assistance program in the short term, that makes its way to the front and the others stay in the appendix. Is that part of what I'm hearing, or am I making that
Yeah,
up?
I think there's general consensus for three of four of these bullet points.
So do we just want to strike the second bullet and? Yeah,
I mean,
does this make people?
Striking it from the top, is that what you're saying, the top of the report?
Right,
Just to go back to like
This is
what we're
the
talking
whole
about.
thing.
No,
This whole thing that we've been talking about today is the top.
Is
Is it?
yes, so we
Yeah.
have,
I don't necessarily agree with this.
You don't necessarily agree with that.
All right, so I'm confused. So
Yeah,
just to
okay.
step back and so I understood it, our committee voted on things that we were elevating to this task force for consideration.
Yes.
So I understood it that the recommendations from the subcommittees would come here and this full group would decide whether or not to adopt them.
Right.
And those would be the recommendations. Now, how they are summarized and organized in a report, you can have an executive summary and which maybe is this, that's fine. But are we adopting all of the recommendations or are we not? That is not now.
Yeah, I'm
it's
still
not
not
clear
clear.
to me.
so my thought, what I was trying to do is because there is overlap and duplication in some of these areas. We had several recommendations across subcommittees that all touched zoning. I think it makes more sense to just make this one zoning recommendation instead of voting individually on the 5 zoning related ideas that came from the subcommittees.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. However, there are details in some of the specific recommendations that I am worried, and I think Rachel might be worried too, that gets interpreted as these things were considered, they're in the appendix, but they didn't really get agreed upon.
Should we be then recasting and synthesizing the recommendations and saying the full recommendations of the subcommittees and all of their work and the detail is attached, but person who's going to read 2 pages, here are the high level synthesized takeaways that the task force universally agreed with, and what I would like to add to that is prioritized as being things that need to be done to increase the production of and affordability of housing in the state, like now. That's where I see the sort of the when I say the book, the front of the book being, a synthesized, it probably doesn't have any of the language of the individual recommendations, but it could be a discussion of sorts of them. Or we could use these bullet points. I think that's where we haven't gotten to that point with this group yet.
We have one more meeting
Yes.
next week.
Yes.
Right, and we're not gonna hit our time
We have.
today.
And we haven't even done public comment.
So I guess, can we vote on the front of the book? Is that what or are we all saying that what's in the front of the book is what we're all agreeing on?
Yeah, yes, what I was,
Okay.
So
I'm
my
sorry?
sense. I'm gonna say, my sense of it is that what Caitlin said, that she sort of put together the themes and put them in categories. So we've done that. So I think that you take this and then you bring back the specifics to us from some of the recommendations that were made, like Like the zoning, we think there should be used like the Utah bill where there's choices given to the towns, for instance, as an example. And that's what we discussed at the next meeting, that this is sort of the start of it. And then we make the more detailed with, and I think we need more time than 2 hours next time, guys. I think we need it, maybe it's a whole day, I don't know, but this is important stuff and we shouldn't shortchange it. So I'll say that. So, and then we can just, and again, all the recommendations from all the committees are still in the report, but after what we say is what we all agreed to. That's what makes sense to me. Is that clear? Being clear.
You take what's on here, turn it into what is on here, turn it into either back in recommendation language, or you've combined them, you've created a new recommendation out of the 4 that were similar.
So, yeah, what I
was
was,
next time?
what I was hoping to do after this meeting is take everything on the slides with the edits that we've made and say, this is one recommendation, this is one recommendation, this is what we're going to vote on next week. So in between today and next week, check with whoever you need to check with within your agency to get their blessing to vote on that language as it is. So for these last 2 slides, my question, because we haven't even gotten to preservation, is there a general recommendation related to short-term supports and to preservation that everybody can agree on that goes in the front of the book, while we still keep all of the specific individual subcommittee recs at the back of the book that people can refer to? So I think we got there with supports for short term. I think I'm hearing that we all are okay as long as we strike the eviction one. Is there a general statement about preservation that we can make? And I know this middle.
Kate, have you talked about manufactured housing? Is that going to be a different one, or is that been aggregated into your?
Yeah, that's sprinkled throughout, Jerry.
So
then you didn't mention the voucher program we talked about in manufactured housing.
Yeah, that was in the last one.
Greater availability of vouchers, including for manufactured homeowners, right? Like that's summarized.
Yeah, I talked about setting up a whole state fund though is one of them. That whole state fund for $300 million and everything else. Sort of the same thing in there, but.
Yeah, I think this captures it, Jerry. I do.
All right.
I'm wondering if, so in the front of the book, you have the production recommendations, and then you have a section that says other considerations for these 2. So it's in the front, but it's separated that it's not, these aren't production issues, but these are other considerations.
I like that, but those other considerations, the whole task force needs to agree on what that language is. So like, you know, we're not gonna reference the eviction stuff.
Right.
So for preservation, I know this second bullet, half of the subcommittee didn't even like that one. So is there a general statement about preservation that we can put in the front of the book as an other consideration that we all can live with?
Everything but the middle bullet point.
I agree.
That's using public subsidies. So
for first right of refusal, that's an economic rate. The state just cannot mandate and give it away. I've gone through this with manufactured housing for years. There's a
the
first
state
right
does,
of
Jerry,
offer.
in the manufactured housing community. So this
Pardon?
is for tax credits. This is for projects that have used public subsidies to make their projects affordable and have had the benefit of that. So I think this is not saying like market rate apartments need to have a right of first refusal.
All right. I'm sorry. Sorry I said anything.
Yeah, the recommendation from finance and development was a little bit longer. Again, I was summarizing for the sake of time and space and readability.
Yeah, I think there's also other tools that would ensure that the project came back to the state.
And I'm totally fine with that, by the way. As a developer, if it's negotiated up front and said, if you're going to accept this funding, you acknowledge that we have the first right, no problem with that at all. What I don't like is I funded a project 5 years ago. We had an exit scenario that involved it going market rate. And then someone passes legislation and comes to me and says, Now you have to make it, and then no one will make an offer on it, because every guy out there knows that I got a first right of refusal to sell it to a. That's my problem with it, is that it kind of changes the goalpost, it moves the goalposts on a project that's already
Yeah,
established.
that's exactly it.
I have no problem with it at all.
Yes, it wouldn't be, I don't think, it could not be retroactive.
Yeah, I think we could change this, so instead of instituting a right of first refusal, but, maybe encourage DSHA to look at funding agreements to evaluate whether a right of refusal or a recapture of subsidies is necessary.
Yeah, it's incorporated as a condition of approval in all future loans.
I have to say, this is a disincentive. This is a clear disincentive for somebody to get into business. It's because of a first right of offer in manufactured housing, people aren't interested in buying manufactured home parks. I think it's really, it can be a strategy piece that maybe they have as part of the offering, but most developers don't want to have first right of offers in there because it has a chilling impact, as Preston said, on how it works.
Let me just make
Jerry,
sure clear.
oh,
I mean,
sorry.
this is not about market rate. This is not about, requiring it on anything. To me, this is a DSHA program and lending criteria recommendation, and I'm.
I think we might want to move it back to the DSHA slide too. in that
Okay.
case.
That's fine. Yep.
All right, so I'll just park this elsewhere. We'll say evaluate ways to recapture, what is I don't know the term.
Yeah, I think recapture is one word, or preserve, recapture or preserve
Or preserve
subsidies in affordable housing development.
subsidies.
Or just preserve preserve affordable housing.
And
It's already been invested by the public. It should stay available as affordable housing. Basically, that's what we're trying to say.
Can we add in just the recapture, preserve, and then right after preserve, public subsidies?
yeah, great, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And shelter.
I'm just not comfortable ending the meeting with that crossed out when I'm still not understand what it means. So maybe, can we have something maybe in the minutes or something that just says we're gonna revisit? The reason, like, I'm still not sure I'm clear on how we're making decisions. And because I know that so many committee members of mine care so, like, that eviction record piece was so important to them, I'm not comfortable crossing it out and walking away, really understanding what that means.
So
Again,
can
like,
we add that to the next meeting, that all the items that,
Yeah, we're going to go back and we're going to figure out exactly what I think that this was really helpful. I think in most instances, we have determined that there is a lot of agreement on a lot of the recommendations, and that we have improved them, at that high level sort of summary. And I think that was a really important part of the exercise, and Caitlin, I think, did a very nice job of pulling from, 5 different subcommittees and trying to synthesize it into, coherent, sensical from a bucket standpoint. I think we do need to take this back now and at the next meeting, present a way for us to, really solidify what this report is going to look like, if not even have something that approaches a draft or a decomposed draft version of it, so that can be really clear. And I hope at that point we have some ways to reconcile some of these places. I think what, unless you have other recommendations, I mean, what we have so far is that all of the subcommittee recommendations will be included. And it will be sort of caveated by the full task force that these are the recommendations of the subcommittee that were included because of the work and the time and the discussion that was put into them, but not necessarily adopted per se by the task force. However, here are the things that the task force has prioritized out of those recommendations, and that becomes the front of the book. And that we present that in whatever way I think synthesized and consolidated is the right way to go. Again, the detail, the individual recommendations, which could be slightly different from one subcommittee's recommendation to the next, but essentially saying the same thing, like that should all be preserved. And we'll find a way to make sure that to me, it's really important that this task force have a very clear and action-oriented set of recommendations that is easy to digest, easy to pick up and run with when it comes to implementation. Because otherwise they just won't be. So that's what I hope we can do for the next meeting. Does that sound right?
Sounds good. And because we are running late, we should probably wrap this. We have another one. And then we do need to leave opportunity for public comment. So is that okay with everyone? Okay, so move to public comment.
Okay, if you'd like to give public comment, please raise your hand. I'm gonna bring up a timer. Folks are gonna have 2 minutes to speak. We also will accept written public comments sent to housing.taskforce@delaware.gov. And those written comments, you can be as verbose as you want. But for this meeting, it's gotta be 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right, I'm going in the order in which I see hands raised, so, 1 second. Okay, Mike Fortner, you're up.
Unmute. Hi, thank you. My name is Mike Fortner. I'm a planner with the city of Newark. However, I'm speaking more for myself than the city of Newark. It doesn't have a position, but I'd like to talk about local zoning reform bullet number 4, which was understands you strike to reduce, eliminate minimum parking requirements for high density residential density. I'd like to encourage that. I think is a good tool. Remember that doesn't force developers not to build the parking that they want. It's just that our local zoning codes in many areas require more parking than probably, excuse me, they need. And excuse me. And so this is a tool that for local governments to, if there was guidance from the state that how we could reduce those requirements, and the developer again can build the parking that they want. I mean, they want to build 6 parking spaces per unit. I guess that's up to them if they want to have all that asphalt, but we found it helpful with some of our affordable housing development to reduce those, and that's been helpful for local developers that developing affordable housing. And that concludes my comment.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next up, we have John McNeil. You should be able to speak now.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. First, I want to congratulate all of you on the work that you've done. It's been tremendous work. And I want to apologize and say probably the greatest regret of this past year was not taking up the opportunity to be a part of this particular task force as invited by my dear friend, Representative Johnson. One thing that I wanted to point to just going through the slides, and that is my position is with the State Council for Persons with Disabilities. I'm the former statewide ADA coordinator and the former DelDOT ADA Title II Section 50 coordinator. Going back to your slide 11 where it says statewide codes should include, I didn't have time to go verbatim. I would suggest, in fact, I would implore that the statewide codes shall consider ADA compliance in them. There are program activity and service, that falls under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is to address our programs, activities, and services for municipalities. It's not just a matter of the architectural, structural facilities. It's also program modification, policy modification that goes along with it. So just because it falls within what the federal requirements are, I really believe that that should be a shall, not a should. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Toro Luby. You should be able to speak now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for all the task work that you've done. My name is Toro Luby, and I'm representing the Southern Delaware Accessory Dwelling Unit Group. And the point is that I'd like to make, there's several points, but the main point is that the first bullet on the first slide was ADU, which of course is accessory dwelling units. Now, I've heard a lot of information and support and details and suggestions about how major developers, rightfully so, can contribute to the affordable housing. However, there's not a seat at the table of that desk for someone such as Michelle Williams from YIMBY, who has been working with this state in order to, she's the Delaware branch of Yes in My Backyard, has been working to help increase the possibility of people having accessory dwelling units on their property. I think that it's important to consult someone who is experienced and educated on the subject as her in order to make sure that we not just give developers incentives, but also give homeowners incentives to have accessory dwelling units on their properties. Rachel and Caitlin last month were at a Sussex County Housing Group meeting and indicated that somewhere between 60 to 75% of all homes are single family homes. This is the largest block, and those blocks ought to have incentives for accessory housing, accessory dwelling units.
Thank you. And I do just want to note that Dr. Williams was a member of our regulatory and permitting subcommittee, so we did benefit from her expertise and participation.
Excellent.
And last but not least, we have Sean Kelly. And Sean, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sean Kelly. I am a member of the Regulatory and Permitting Subcommittee, in addition to being an affordable housing developer with LNWA. I heard the word, I think it was Senator Huxtable used specificity today, so I want to be very specific in my comment. My note says slide 8. This is the funding slide that was shown, and this is specifically related to the note related to bond financing. The comment or the note is rather broad in highlighting municipal bonds, but what I want to call out is that I think what we're attempting to encourage here for housing creation is the utilization of private activity bonds. Private activity bonds are revenue bonds that are issued by, the public for utilization and finance of non-governmental activities, specifically housing. They're well utilized by the Delaware State Housing Authority in concert with the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. But I would suggest that we could have broader utilization of public activity bonds for the creation of all types of new housing. And I think that why I want to call out that this is important is that currently in Newcastle County, there is a prohibition on using private activity bonds for the creation of housing under the Code of Ordinances. So I would like to see all levels of government across our state have the opportunity, if it made sense to them, to utilize private activity bonds for a public-private partnership in creating housing. Because at the end of the day, I do believe it is going to be a public-private partnership. I don't think our local governments want to get into the creation of housing. They want to leave that to the private development community that they can work in partnership with. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes public comment. Again, if you want to send written comments within the next 48 hours, please send them to housing.taskforce@delaware.gov. I'm looking to our last chair standing to see if we can adjourn.
To adjourn with only one co-chair?
I hope so.
We're gonna say yes.
We're in trouble.
Okay, yeah, all right, we're adjourned.
Should we consider a longer meeting, Caitlin?
I'm gonna have to get back to you on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.